Wrenhall Manor wasn't just a house. It was in my blood. Every brick, every weathered beam spoke of centuries of my family's legacy. I'd grown up with the weight of it all, but it wasn't something I resented. It was a purpose, a reminder of the Thorne family's place in history. I thought Serena understood that. From the moment we met, she seemed to share my reverence for history. Her fascination with the estate felt genuine. The way she'd trace her fingers along the woodwork, marvel at the hand-carved details, or bury herself in Wrenhall's library as if searching for something precious, it made me believe we were aligned. She often said she loved the living history of Wrenhall, and I believed her. But as I now know, people can love the idea of something without ever truly respecting it. It started with little things, comments I brushed aside at first. "Don't you ever feel chained to this place?" she asked one evening as we walked through the gallery. The moonlight from the tall windows painted silver streaks on the floorboards. I stopped to look at her. "Not chained. Grounded," I said simply. She gave me a small smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Grounded. That's a nice way to put it." The way she said it didn't sit well with me, but I let it go. I chalked it up to her city upbringing. Serena came from a world of sleek penthouses and bustling streets, far removed from the timeless weight of Wrenhall. I told myself it would take time for her to truly understand. Then came Victor Gray. Victor was a suggestion Serena introduced with the ease of someone proposing a simple household improvement. "He's a financial consultant," she told me one evening, her enthusiasm palpable. "He specializes in helping estates like Wrenhall modernize their management. Archer, you're brilliant with the history, but you can't do everything alone. This is the future we need." The idea of modernizing Wrenhall was unsettling. To me, the manor's timelessness was its strength. It had weathered centuries without bending to the whims of passing trends. "Why fix what isn't broken?" I asked her. "It's not about fixing," she replied smoothly, leaning across the dining table, her fingers brushing mine. "It's about securing Wrenhall's future. For us. For us." It was hard to argue with that. So, against my better judgment, I agreed to meet him. When Victor arrived, his charm filled the room before he even spoke. Polished, affable, and quick to flatter. He seemed to know exactly what to say to put me at ease. But there was something too smooth about him, like a polished mirror hiding cracks underneath. He played his part well, commending me on my stewardship of Wrenhall, but I caught the way his gaze lingered on Serena. Subtle but too familiar. Still, I had no proof of anything beyond my instincts. I dismissed my unease, convincing myself I was being paranoid. But Wrenhall has a way of revealing truths, even when you're not ready for them. The night I overheard them, I wasn't looking for trouble. It was one of my usual walks, those quiet moments where I let the estate itself calm my mind. The gardens were still under the cool night air, and the distant chirp of crickets filled the silence. Passing the conservatory, I saw the faint glow of lights through the glass. Voices drifted out, muffled but unmistakable. I stopped, recognizing Serena's voice immediately. "You think he suspects anything?" The male voice was Victor's, smooth and confident. "No," Serena replied, her tone clipped. "Archer's too blinded by his love for this place. Wrenhall is everything to him. He doesn't see what's happening under his nose." I froze, my pulse hammering in my ears. What was she talking about? She continued, her voice colder than I'd ever heard it. "We'll fake the pregnancy. That'll lock him in. He won't hesitate to sign over control if he thinks it's for the sake of the heir he's always wanted." Victor chuckled, a low, mocking sound that made my stomach churn. "And once we have control, Wrenhall is as good as ours." I stepped back into the shadows, my fists clenched so tightly my nails bit into my palms. My mind reeled. The woman I had trusted, the one I thought was my partner, was planning to steal my legacy. Worse, she was using my love and my desire for a future for our family as tools to manipulate me. I wanted to burst into the conservatory, to demand answers right then and there. But something stopped me. A cold clarity settled over me like the stillness before a storm. If they thought I was blind, I would let them believe it, for now. This wasn't just betrayal. This was war. And I would make sure they paid for every lie, every deceitful word. They had underestimated me. And Wrenhall. After that night, I couldn't look at Serena the same way. Every glance, every word, felt tainted by the weight of her betrayal. She'd walk into a room with that practiced smile of hers, greet me with a kiss, and for a fleeting moment, I'd wonder if I'd imagined it all. But then her words from the conservatory would echo in my mind. "We'll fake the pregnancy." I knew better than to confront her outright. Serena was clever, far too adept at turning conversations to her advantage. If I let on that I knew, she'd weave some story that made me the villain and her the victim. No, I needed to be smarter than that, calculated, methodical, just like she was. I started by calling Tobias Ward, our family's lawyer. Tobias had been with the Thorns for decades. He was sharp, loyal, and knew every intricate detail of Renhall's legal framework. "Tobias," I said, keeping my tone casual, "I've been thinking about updating some of the estate's documents. You know, just to make sure everything's in order." He chuckled lightly. "Thinking about your legacy already, Archer? You've got plenty of years left." "Always best to be prepared," I replied, forcing a smile he couldn't see. "Let's meet soon. There are a few details I'd like to revisit." We scheduled a meeting for later that week. In the meantime, I contacted Evelyn Creed, a private investigator recommended by a trusted friend. Evelyn was discreet and efficient, with a reputation for uncovering secrets most people would take to their graves. I needed to know exactly who Victor Gray was, and how far Serena's betrayal went. Serena, for her part, continued her charade flawlessly. She'd chat with me over breakfast about plans for the estate, casually slipping in ideas that sounded harmless but now felt like pieces of a larger scheme. "Archer, I've been thinking," she said one morning, her tone light as she stirred sugar into her tea. "What if we hosted a gala at Renhall? Something grand to attract investors. It could be a chance to show people the potential of the estate." I raised an eyebrow, keeping my expression neutral. "Investors? For what?" She hesitated, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second. "You know, for modernization efforts. It's something Victor mentioned." Victor. His name was a stain on every conversation now. "I'll think about it," I said, and she beamed, thinking she'd won another small victory. By the time I met with Tobias, Evelyn had already uncovered some of Victor's history. The man was a professional con artist. He'd worked his way into the confidence of several estate owners, promising financial salvation while draining them dry. Every time, he left behind a trail of ruined families and destroyed legacies. And Serena? She wasn't his first accomplice. Under various aliases, she had partnered with Victor before, posing as the doting spouse or trusted advisor to gain access to wealth that wasn't hers. They had done this before. Many times. I sat across from Tobias in his office, gripping the armrests of my chair as I shared what I had learned. "Tobias, I need to make sure that no matter what happens, Renhall stays in my control," I said firmly. "Can it be done?" He frowned, leaning back in his chair. "It won't be easy, Archer. If Serena has legal ties to the estate as your wife, she could argue for partial control, especially if she plays the pregnancy card." I clenched my jaw. "Then we'll make it airtight. Rework the trust, restructure the ownership, whatever it takes." Tobias nodded slowly. "I'll need time, but it's doable. Do you want to involve Serena in this process?" "No," I said, my voice cold. "This is between us. She'll find out when the ink is dry." Over the next few weeks, I played the part of the oblivious husband. I let Serena and Victor believe they were pulling the strings, while I silently reworked the game. At dinner, I pretended to entertain Serena's ideas, nodding along as she and Victor spun their plans. I even agreed to the gala she'd suggested, knowing it would be the perfect stage for what I had in mind. Behind the scenes, Evelyn dug deeper into their history. The more I learned, the angrier I became. Victor's cons had left elderly widows penniless, turned family homes into auction properties, and destroyed lifetimes of work. Serena's involvement stung even more. Every fake smile, every gentle touch she offered me now felt like a knife to the back. But I stayed silent, biding my time. They wanted Renhall? Fine. I'd let them believe they were winning, let them think I was blind. And then, when the time was right, I'd show them exactly what happens when you betray a thorn. The gala was Serena's brainchild, or at least, that's what she wanted me to think. I pretended to be reluctant at first, as if she needed to convince me. It wasn't hard to play the part of the skeptical husband. Every word out of her mouth grated against the anger I was holding back. But I let her win, agreeing to the event while keeping my own plans under wraps. The preparations consumed her for weeks. She threw herself into every detail: the guest list, the menu, the decorations. It was almost amusing to watch her pour her energy into what she believed was her victory lap. Victor, of course, was her shadow, always hovering nearby. I pretended not to notice the stolen glances between them or the way their conversations dropped to hushed tones when I entered the room. They thought I was oblivious. That was their first mistake. While Serena and Victor played host and hostess in waiting, Tobias and I worked in the background. Every financial document tied to Wren Hall was scrutinized and restructured. Ownership was transferred to a trust so tightly locked that even Serena wouldn't be able to touch it without my consent. Tobias ensured that the legal framework was unbreakable, with clauses that accounted for every possible scenario. By the time the gala approached, Wren Hall was no longer just an estate, it was a fortress. The keys to its gates were now firmly in my hands, and neither Serena nor Victor had any idea. The night of the gala arrived, and Wren Hall had never looked more magnificent. The grand ballroom shimmered under the glow of crystal chandeliers. Guests in elegant attire filled the room, their laughter and conversation echoing against the polished walls. Serena flitted between them like a queen, her emerald gown catching the light as she charmed everyone she spoke to. I stayed on the periphery, greeting guests and ensuring the event ran smoothly. My calm demeanor masked the storm brewing inside me. This wasn't just a gala, it was a stage. And tonight, the curtain would fall on Serena and Victor's performance. Victor arrived late, as I expected he would, making a grand entrance in his tailored suit. He greeted me with that smooth, practiced smile that had fooled so many others. I returned it with one of my own, though mine carried an edge of steel. "Victor," I said, shaking his hand firmly. "Glad you could make it." "Wouldn't miss it for the world," he replied, his eyes darting briefly to Serena, who was across the room, laughing with a group of trustees. If only he knew what was coming. As the evening wore on, Serena and Victor began their pitch. They approached the trustees, weaving tales of modernization and growth. Serena's charm was in full force, while Victor played the role of the savvy consultant. They painted a vision of Wren Hall's future, one that conveniently centered on them. I watched from a distance, letting them dig their graves a little deeper with every word. When the time was right, I made my move. Standing at the head of the ballroom, I raised my glass to signal the room. The chatter quieted, and all eyes turned to me. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice steady and clear, "thank you for joining us tonight to celebrate Wren Hall and its legacy. This estate has stood for centuries, a testament to the resilience and ingenuity of those who came before us. And tonight, we honor not just its past, but its future." A ripple of polite applause filled the room. Serena smiled at me from across the floor, clearly believing this was her moment. Victor stood beside her, his confidence unshaken. "But before we look ahead," I continued, "I think it's important to address the challenges we face. Change is inevitable, but it must be handled with care and integrity. Wren Hall deserves nothing less." I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. Then, I turned toward Serena and Victor. "Unfortunately," I said, my tone hardening, "not everyone shares that commitment." The room fell silent. Serena's smile faltered, confusion flickering across her face. Victor shifted uneasily beside her, a bead of sweat forming on his brow. "Over the past few months," I went on, "I've come to learn of certain actions that threaten the very foundation of what Wren Hall stands for. Actions rooted in greed, deceit, and betrayal." Gasps and murmurs spread through the crowd. Serena's face turned pale, her composure cracking. "Archer, what are you talking about?" she said, her voice trembling slightly. I ignored her, raising my hand to signal Evelyn Creed, who stood near the doorway. She stepped forward, carrying a stack of documents. "These," I said, taking the papers from Evelyn, "are the results of an investigation into Victor Gray, a man who has made a career of conning families out of their estates. And Serena Vale, his accomplice." The room erupted into chaos. Serena stammered, trying to protest, but her voice was drowned out by the uproar. Victor took a step back, his confident facade crumbling. "I have evidence," I continued, holding up the documents, of their plans to seize control of Renhall by fraudulent means. Every scheme, every lie, is documented here. And let me make one thing clear. Renhall is not for sale. As the truth unraveled before the stunned crowd, I saw the realization hit Serena and Victor like a thunderclap. They had lost. Everything they thought they were about to gain was slipping through their fingers. But I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. The ballroom was a storm of whispers and gasps, the once lively chatter replaced with disbelief. Serena's face was a mix of shock and anger, her carefully constructed mask slipping. Victor stood frozen, his usual charm replaced with a blank stare of a man caught in the act. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment their lies unraveled in front of everyone they sought to deceive. Serena stepped forward, her voice trembling but loud enough to cut through the murmurs. "Archer, this is insane. What are you talking about?" Her eyes darted around the room, searching for support among the guests. "You're making baseless accusations in front of everyone. Your family, our friends, without a shred of proof." Her indignation might have fooled some, but I had come prepared. "I'm glad you asked, Serena," I said calmly, holding up a file Evelyn had compiled. "These are Victor's financial records, offshore accounts, dummy corporations, and links to estates he advised into ruin. And here," I added, pulling out another document, "is your correspondence with him. Your emails, your messages, even recorded conversations." The weight of the evidence hit the room like a thunderclap. Victor flinched, realizing the net was tightening. "This is ridiculous," he snapped, his voice rising. "I don't know where you got this, but it's all fabricated. A smear campaign." I tilted my head, feigning curiosity. "Fabricated? Interesting. Because the documents also include the details of your last scam, Lady Henshaw's estate, if I'm not mistaken? The one you and Serena bled dry before vanishing." Victor's face turned ashen. That name wasn't public knowledge. Evelyn's thoroughness had exposed even the skeletons he thought he'd buried. Around the room, the trustees began murmuring, some exchanging horrified glances. These weren't just accusations, they were damning facts. Serena tried again, her voice tinged with desperation. "Archer, stop this. Please. We can talk about this privately." I cut her off, my voice as cold as the marble floors beneath us. "You lost the privilege of privacy the moment you betrayed me and this estate. You think I didn't hear you that night in the conservatory, plotting to fake a pregnancy to manipulate me, using my love for Renhall as a weapon against me?" The room fell silent again. This time, there was no saving face for her. The color drained from her cheeks, and her hands trembled as she clutched the edge of the nearest table. "Everything," I said, taking a step closer to her, "every lie, every scheme. You thought you could pull it off without consequence. But you forgot one thing, Serena. Renhall is mine. And I don't take betrayal lightly." Victor, sensing the tide turning completely against them, tried to regain control. "This is absurd," he spat, attempting to rally the crowd. "Archer's just spinning tales to cover his own insecurities. He's threatened by the idea of change. That's all this is. An old man clinging to his outdated legacy." I let him finish, then gestured toward Evelyn, who walked to the middle of the room. She pulled out a small device and pressed play. Victor's voice filled the ballroom. "You think he suspects anything? No. Archer's too blinded by his love for this place." The room collectively inhaled as the recording played on, Serena's voice detailing their plan to fake a pregnancy and take control of Renhall. When the recording ended, the silence was deafening. Victor's shoulders sagged, and Serena's gaze fell to the floor. They both knew the game was over. The trustees were the first to respond. Lady Marlowe, one of Renhall's oldest allies, stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "I think it's clear who doesn't belong here," she said, her glare fixed on Victor and Serena. "Archer, we stand with you." One by one, others followed, voicing their support. What little hope Serena and Victor might have clung to vanished as the room turned against them. But I wasn't finished. "I took the liberty of protecting Renhall from any further harm," I announced. "The estate is now secured under a trust that neither of you can touch. Every avenue you might have used to exploit this place is closed." I stepped closer to Victor, my voice low but firm. "And as for you, you won't be walking away from this one unscathed. I've already sent copies of these documents to every estate you've defrauded. By tomorrow, the authorities will have enough evidence to ensure you're held accountable." Victor's bravado cracked, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. He looked to Serena, but she had nothing left to offer him. "Serena," I said, turning to her, "you made your choices. You chose greed over loyalty, deceit over honesty, and now, you'll face the consequences." Her lip quivered, but she said nothing. The fight had gone out of her. I signaled to the staff I had hired for the night, 2 security guards stationed discreetly near the doors. They stepped forward, their imposing presence ensuring neither Serena nor Victor tried to slip away. "This event is over," I declared to the room. "But rest assured, Wren Hall will endure. Betrayal won't tarnish its legacy." As the guests began to leave, murmuring among themselves, I watched as the guards escorted Serena and Victor out of the manor. They didn't look back. When the last of the trustees departed and the ballroom was empty, I stood alone in the silence. Wren Hall had survived the storm, its walls as steadfast as ever. But inside, I felt a strange mixture of triumph and sadness. I had won, yes, but the cost was a piece of myself I could never reclaim. This place, this legacy, had always been my anchor. And now, it was a fortress once more. The night after the gala, Wren Hall Manor was silent. The same halls that had echoed with music and laughter now felt eerily still, as though the house itself was catching its breath after the storm. I wandered through its familiar corridors, the faint scent of candle wax and aged wood comforting me in a way little else could. Victor and Serena were gone, escorted out like the thieves they were. But their absence didn't bring the relief I'd expected. Instead, it left an ache, a deep, hollow void I couldn't ignore. 4 years, I had trusted Serena, shared my life with her, and believed she loved me as much as I had loved her. That illusion was now shattered, and though I was glad to have exposed her deceit, the loss of that trust weighed heavy. The following morning, Tobias arrived at Wren Hall with updates. As he walked into the library, the morning sunlight streaming through the tall windows, he carried the kind of grim satisfaction that comes with a job well done. "The trust has been fully activated," Tobias said, laying a folder on the desk. "Wren Hall is untouchable now. Even in the worst-case scenario, no one, not Serena, not Victor, will be able to challenge its ownership." I nodded, though the victory felt more like a necessity than a triumph. "And what about the authorities?" "Evelyn forwarded everything to the proper channels," he replied. "Between Victor's fraudulent activities and Serena's involvement, they're looking at serious charges. It's out of our hands now." I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. "Good." Tobias hesitated before speaking again. "Archer, there's something else. Serena's lawyer reached out this morning. That caught my attention." "Her lawyer?" "Yes. It seems she's attempting to negotiate some sort of settlement. She's asking for leniency." I scoffed, the bitterness rising unbidden. "Leniency? After everything she's done? After she tried to destroy this family's legacy?" Tobias gave me a steady look. "It's your call. If you want to pursue harsher penalties, we can. But if you choose leniency, it might expedite things." I didn't respond immediately. My anger flared at the thought of letting her off lightly, but another part of me wondered if dragging this out was worth the cost. Finally, I met Tobias's gaze. "Tell her lawyer I'll consider it," I said. "But only after I've had time to think." Over the next few days, the fallout became public knowledge. Victor's name and reputation were irreparably tarnished. The estates he defrauded over the years began filing lawsuits, and his image graced the front pages of local and national papers. For a man who had built his life on deceit and charm, his downfall was swift and unforgiving. Serena's name was tied to his in every article, every scandal. Though her role was smaller, the damage to her reputation was no less severe. She had no friends left, no allies to defend her. The woman who once commanded rooms with her smile was now reduced to whispers and scorn. Part of me felt vindicated, but another part felt empty. One evening, as I sat in Wren Hall's study, Evelyn Creed called. "Archer," she began, her voice calm as always, "I've completed the last of the reports. I thought you'd want to know." "Tell me." I found Serena's correspondence with Victor dating back nearly a year before she even suggested hiring him, Evelyn said. It's clear she was never here for Renhall. She was here for him. They planned this from the start. Her words confirmed what I'd already suspected, but hearing it out loud still cut deep. Anything else? I asked, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. Evelyn hesitated. Yes. I also uncovered emails she sent to mutual acquaintances, people she was trying to manipulate into thinking you were the problem. She planned to paint you as controlling, outdated, obsessed with the estate. It was part of their strategy to isolate you. I clenched the phone, anger bubbling beneath the surface. But then Evelyn added something unexpected. She also wrote letters she never sent. To you. That caught me off guard. What do you mean? They're drafts, Evelyn explained. Apologies. Confessions. I'll send them to you if you want, but they're not pleasant. I stared at the desk, my mind spinning. No, I said finally. I don't need to see them. Let them stay unread. Evelyn didn't press me. Understood. If there's anything else, let me know. Thank you, I said quietly, hanging up. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, Renhall began to feel like itself again. The staff resumed their routines, the gardens bloomed with the first signs of spring, and the house seemed to breathe a little easier. But for me, the scars of Serena's betrayal lingered. One afternoon, I stood in the gallery, staring at the family crest engraved above the fireplace. What is ours, we guard. Those words had guided the Thorns for generations, and now they resonated with me more than ever. I'd protected Renhall from destruction, but at what cost? I thought of Serena, her laugh, her clever mind, the way she once looked at me with admiration. I had loved her, truly. And now, all that remained was a hollow echo of what could have been. As I turned to leave, I caught sight of my reflection in the polished glass of a cabinet. The man staring back looked older, wearier, but there was a resolve in his eyes, a promise to himself and to Renhall. The betrayal had wounded me, but it hadn't broken me. Renhall was safe, and so was its legacy. And for now that was enough. Life at Renhall began to return to a semblance of normalcy. The staff resumed their duties with a quiet diligence, the manor's timeless rhythm once again steady. But for me, the air still felt heavy. Though Serena and Victor were gone, their betrayal lingered like a ghost in every room they had touched. I had won, but at a cost I hadn't yet come to terms with. In the days following the gala, the fallout spread quickly. Victor's arrest made headlines, his mugshot plastered across newspapers alongside damning details of his schemes. Serena, though not yet charged, was implicated enough to lose her social standing entirely. The glittering world she'd fought so hard to ascend had turned its back on her. I should have felt triumphant seeing their lives unravel as they'd planned for mine. But the satisfaction was fleeting. The legacy of Renhall was intact, yet the personal cost felt heavier than I had imagined. A week later, I received a letter. The envelope was plain, the handwriting unmistakably Serena's. It arrived through a courier, bypassing my usual channels. Against my better judgment, I opened it. Archer, it began, the ink smudged in places, as though written with a shaking hand. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect you to read this. But I need to say what I couldn't that night. You were good to me, better than I deserved. I never wanted to destroy Renhall, not at first. When I met Victor again, I thought I was helping you, that his expertise could improve the estate. But somewhere along the way, I lost myself. Victor was persuasive, convincing me that Renhall's history was a cage for both of us. He fed into my fears and my flaws, and I let him. By the time I realized what we were doing, it was too late. I don't excuse what I did. I know I betrayed you in every way that matters. I hope someday you can remember me as something other than the woman who tried to ruin you. And I hope Renhall stands forever. Serena. I read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in my desk. Her words didn't absolve her, but they lingered, leaving a bitter taste I couldn't quite shake. Later that evening, Tobias called with an update. Victor's trial is set for next month, he said. And Serena's lawyer has reached out again, asking if you're willing to keep her out of court. I frowned, leaning against the desk. What exactly are they offering? An agreement. She'll give a full deposition against Victor, ensuring a conviction, in exchange for no charges being filed against her. It was a clever move, and one that made sense for Serena. She'd always known how to navigate chaos to her advantage. But it left me with a choice I wasn't ready to make. She'll get nothing from Renhall, correct? I asked. Nothing, Tobias confirmed. Her involvement in the trust is completely severed. I mulled it over. Tell her lawyer I'll think about it. Tobias hesitated. Do you think she deserves that mercy? I don't know, I admitted. But I'm not making this decision out of anger. Not anymore. The following weeks brought quiet, a kind of stillness that Renhall hadn't known in years. For the first time in what felt like forever, I focused on the estate itself. Repairs that had been delayed were finally addressed, the grounds flourished under the care of the gardeners, and I found solace in the routines that once felt like a burden. The staff, loyal as ever, treated me with a newfound respect. They'd seen the ordeal unfold and stood by me when it mattered most. Even Evelyn, who had long since completed her work, stopped by one afternoon to check in. How are you holding up? She asked, leaning casually against the library doorway. Better than I expected, I admitted. But it's a strange feeling, winning a fight you never wanted to have. Evelyn nodded, her sharp eyes softening. It's the price of standing your ground. But you did what needed to be done, Archer. Renhall is safe because of you. Her words, though comforting, didn't ease the ache entirely. What about Serena? I asked. Have you heard anything? She's laying low, Evelyn said. The press moved on to Victor, and she's avoiding the spotlight. From what I've gathered, she's trying to rebuild, but without him. That, at least, brought a flicker of relief. Whatever Serena's next chapter held, it wouldn't involve Victor Gray. One evening, as I walked the estate grounds, I found myself standing before the conservatory, the very place where I had first overheard their betrayal. The glass panes gleamed in the moonlight, reflecting the stars above. I stepped inside, the faint scent of orchids and soil greeting me. For years, this had been one of my favorite spots in Renhall, a sanctuary of quiet and life. Now, it felt tainted, but I refused to let that memory define it. Renhall had endured centuries of storms, wars, and betrayals. It would endure this too, and so would I. As I stood there, surrounded by the soft glow of moonlight filtering through the glass, I made a promise to myself. I would guard this place, as my family had for generations. But I would also guard my heart, stronger, wiser, and more certain of who I let into my world. The shadows beneath Renhall might linger, but they would never consume its light. Or mine. Weeks passed, then months, and Renhall began to feel like home again. The betrayal that had nearly shattered its foundation became just another story in its long history, a cautionary tale etched into the Thorn legacy. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace. The estate was secure, its future protected, and my resolve stronger than ever. Still, there were reminders. Serena's presence lingered in the smallest of things, a scarf she'd left behind in the coat room, her handwriting on old notes about the library catalog. Some days, I'd catch myself expecting her to walk into a room, ready with one of her charming smiles. But I reminded myself that those moments were illusions, crafted by a woman who had never truly been who I thought she was. Victor, meanwhile, was exactly where he belonged, behind bars. His trial had concluded swiftly, thanks in part to Serena's deposition. Though I chose not to press charges against her, she wasn't left unscathed. Her reputation was in ruins, her social circles dismantled. She'd retreated to a small flat in the city, far removed from the grandeur she once craved. I didn't follow her story closely. It wasn't my responsibility anymore. My focus was on Renhall and the life I was rebuilding within its walls. One crisp autumn morning, Tobias visited with a document for me to sign, a final confirmation of Renhall's untouchable status within the trust. We sat in the study, the fireplace crackling softly as I scrawled my name at the bottom of the page. There, Tobias said, leaning back in his chair. That's the last of it. Renhall is now more secure than it's ever been. No one can touch it. Not even you, technically. I smirked. Good. That's the way it should be. He studied me for a moment, his expression thoughtful. You've come through this remarkably well, Archer. Most people wouldn't have recovered so quickly from what you've been through. I poured us both a glass of brandy, handing him one. The truth is, Tobias, I didn't have much of a choice. Wren Hall has stood for centuries. It's bigger than me, bigger than any betrayal. That's what I hold on to. Tobias raised his glass in a silent toast, and we sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the flames dance. Despite the quiet, a part of me felt restless. The months of legal battles, scheming, and emotional turmoil had left a void. 4 years, Wren Hall had consumed my every waking moment, and now that the storm had passed, I realized there was more to life than the estate. For the first time in years, I wanted to reconnect with the world beyond its gates. It began with small steps. I visited nearby towns, attended community events, and reconnected with old friends I'd neglected in my years of stewardship. It was strange at first, stepping out of the shadow of Wren Hall's towering legacy, but it was liberating too. I began to rediscover myself, not just as the Thorn heir, but as a man. One evening, during a charity auction in the neighboring village, I met someone unexpected. Her name was Claire Dalton, a historian specializing in estate preservation. She'd been invited to the auction as a guest speaker, her work helping to restore historic properties, earning her a reputation as one of the best in her field. We struck up a conversation after her presentation, her passion for history shining through as she spoke. Unlike Serena, there was no pretense to Claire. She didn't see estates like Wren Hall as prizes to be claimed or exploited. She saw them as living testaments to the past, deserving of care and respect. "You must be Archer Thorne," she said with a warm smile. "I've heard about Wren Hall, its library alone is legendary. And what have you heard about its current caretaker?" I asked, my tone teasing. "Only that he's fiercely protective," she replied, her smile widening. "As he should be." For the first time in a long while, I felt the stirrings of something unfamiliar, hope. Over the following weeks, Claire and I exchanged letters, then phone calls, and eventually, she visited Wren Hall. Watching her explore the manor was a revelation. She moved through the halls with a sense of wonder, her fingertips brushing the ancient stone walls as though she were connecting with the past itself. "You've done an incredible job preserving this place," she said one evening as we stood in the gallery, the light from the chandelier casting soft shadows on the walls. "But I hope you know there's more to life than this." Her words lingered with me long after she left. Wren Hall would always be my home, my anchor, but Claire had reminded me that even the strongest foundations needed room to grow. Over time, Claire became a regular presence at Wren Hall. She helped me reimagine parts of the estate, not by modernizing it as Victor and Serena had wanted, but by finding ways to share its history with others. We hosted small events, opened the library to historians, and created programs to teach local children about the estate's legacy. For the first time in years, Wren Hall felt alive, not just as a monument to the past, but as a bridge to the future. And I felt alive with it. One evening, as I stood in the conservatory, the scent of orchids filling the air, Claire joined me. She looked at me with the same warmth that had drawn me to her months before. "This place suits you," she said softly. "But you're not defined by it, Archer. Don't forget that." I took her hand, a small smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. "Wren Hall is part of me," I said. "But you're right. It's not all of me." For the first time in a long while, I felt like I could truly move forward. The shadows beneath Wren Hall would always be there, but so would its light. And now, for the first time, I wasn't walking its halls alone. One morning, as we walked the estate grounds, Claire turned to me with a look of curiosity. "Archer, have you ever thought about opening Wren Hall to the public?" I raised an eyebrow. "A public estate? Wren Hall has always been private." She nodded thoughtfully. "I understand. But think of what it could mean, to share its history with people who'd never otherwise experience it. Schools, historians, even families looking for a glimpse into the past." I hesitated. The idea of strangers roaming these halls felt foreign, even invasive. Yet, there was a part of me that understood what she meant. Wren Hall had survived through the centuries because it was cherished and valued. Perhaps sharing its story wasn't just a risk, it was a responsibility. "Let me think on it," I said, and Claire smiled, knowing she'd planted a seed. The following weeks were a flurry of activity. With Claire's encouragement, I began reaching out to local organizations and historians. Together, we planned a small trial event, a guided tour and exhibition showcasing some of Wren Hall's rarest artifacts. The preparations unearthed treasures I hadn't seen in years, handwritten journals from my ancestors, an intricately detailed map of the estate from the 18th century, and an ornate set of porcelain tea ware gifted to the Thorns by a visiting nobleman. Each piece felt like a thread in Wrenhall's tapestry, connecting past to present. On the day of the event, the estate buzzed with energy. Children marveled at the suits of armor in the gallery, while history enthusiasts pored over the manuscripts in the library. The halls that once echoed with silence now hummed with curiosity and wonder. I found Claire in the conservatory, leading a small group through the rows of exotic plants. Her enthusiasm was infectious as she recounted the history of each bloom. She caught my eye and smiled, and for a moment I stood there, watching her bring Wrenhall to life in a way I never could have imagined. That evening, as the last guest departed, Claire and I sat in the garden, the cool air tinged with the scent of lavender. "You were right," I admitted, breaking the silence. "Opening Wrenhall was the right thing to do." Her smile was warm, her hand finding mine. "I didn't do this alone, Archer. You trusted me, and that means everything." I looked at her, the firelight from a nearby lantern casting soft shadows on her face. For years, I had been so consumed by protecting Wrenhall that I forgot how to let anyone in. With Claire, it felt natural. "Wrenhall isn't just a legacy," I said quietly. "It's a home. And for the first time, it feels like one again." By summer, Wrenhall had become a hub of activity. The trial event had been a success, and we expanded the programs to include seasonal workshops, historical reenactments, and even a small summer festival for the local community. The festival was Claire's idea, a celebration of Wrenhall's history, complete with food stalls, live music, and games for children. As the day unfolded, I wandered the grounds, watching families laugh and play, their joy reflected in the sparkling fountains and sunlit gardens. It was during the festival that Claire approached me with a box in her hands. She looked unusually nervous, her cheeks flushed from the summer heat. "What's this?" I asked, taking the box from her. "Open it," she said, her voice tinged with excitement. Inside was a beautifully restored book, a ledger dating back to the earliest days of Wrenhall. Its pages, though yellowed with age, were meticulously preserved, the Thorn family crest embossed on the cover. "I found it in the archives," Claire explained. "It's a record of the first Thorn to live here. I thought it deserved to be displayed." I ran my fingers over the cover, the weight of history in my hands. "This is incredible," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you." Claire stepped closer, her hand brushing mine. "Archer, Wrenhall is your legacy. But it's also a gift. Sharing it with others doesn't diminish its worth, it magnifies it." Her words struck a chord deep within me. For so long, I had guarded Wrenhall like a fortress, afraid that letting others in would somehow weaken it. But Claire had shown me that true strength came from connection, from sharing the beauty of this place with others. As the sun set over the estate, I stood on the balcony overlooking the gardens. Below, the festival lights twinkled like stars, the laughter of children drifting up on the warm breeze. Claire joined me, her arms slipping around mine. "This is what Wrenhall was meant to be," she said softly. I nodded, the weight of the past finally lifting. For the first time in years, it feels whole. Claire smiled, resting her head on my shoulder. "And so do you." For the first time since the betrayal, I realized she was right. Years passed, and Wrenhall flourished. What had once been a quiet, guarded estate became a vibrant cornerstone of the community. The halls no longer echoed with isolation but with laughter, discovery, and connection. History was alive again within these walls, and with every event, every visitor, Wrenhall grew not weaker, but stronger. Claire became an inseparable part of my life and Wrenhall's story. Together, we curated exhibits, brought in historians from across the country, and transformed the estate into a living museum that honored the Thorn legacy. But more than that, we built something I hadn't realized I was missing: a future. One spring morning, as the dew still clung to the grass, I stood in the garden with Claire, overseeing the finishing touches for another festival. She was radiant, her hair catching the early sunlight as she directed a group of volunteers setting up tents. When she turned to me, a familiar spark danced in her eyes. "I think this might be our best one yet," she said, gesturing to the rows of stalls and decorations. I nodded, my gaze lingering on her. "It's not just the festival. It's everything. This place, it feels alive again because of you." She laughed softly, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. You give me too much credit, Archer. Wrenhall was always alive. You just needed to see it. Her words stayed with me long after the festival ended. That night, as we stood on the balcony overlooking the moonlit grounds, I reached for her hand. Claire, I began, my voice steady but filled with emotion, you've done more than help me save Wrenhall. You've helped me save myself. I don't want to imagine this place, or my life, without you. Her eyes widened, but the smile that followed was soft and knowing. I feel the same, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. In that moment, with the stars above and the legacy of Wrenhall stretching out before us, I knew I'd found what I had been searching for. Not just a partner in life, but someone who understood the soul of this place as deeply as I did. The following spring, Claire and I were married in the garden, beneath the towering oak trees that had stood for centuries. The ceremony was small, attended by friends, staff, and members of the community who had become part of Wrenhall's extended family. As Claire and I exchanged vows, I glanced toward the manor, its windows glowing with the warm light of the day. It wasn't just a house, it was a testament to resilience, a symbol of history's power to endure and evolve. In the years that followed, Wrenhall became a beacon of preservation and education, hosting scholars, families, and children eager to learn about its storied past. Claire and I worked tirelessly to ensure that its legacy would outlive us both, creating endowments and programs that would safeguard the estate for generations to come. But it wasn't just the estate that grew, it was our family too. The laughter of children once again filled the halls as Claire and I raised two daughters who carried the Thorn name with pride. They explored Wrenhall as I once had, running through its corridors and listening wide-eyed to tales of their ancestors. One evening, as I watched my youngest daughter run through the gallery, her laughter echoing against the ancient walls, Claire joined me, her arm slipping around my waist. She loves this place as much as you do, she said with a smile. I nodded, my heart full. It's hers to love. And one day, it'll be hers to protect. The shadows beneath Wrenhall never truly disappeared. The memories of betrayal, loss, and pain lingered in the corners, reminders of what had been endured. But they were no longer the defining story. They were merely one chapter in a much larger book, a book of resilience, love, and renewal. As I stood on the balcony one last time, the estate bathed in the golden glow of twilight, I felt a deep sense of peace. Wrenhall had weathered every storm, every betrayal, and it stood as strong as ever. And so did I. The Thorn family motto rang clear in my mind. What is ours, we guard. Wrenhall was ours. And it always would be.